Crowd Scene.
In this episode, we meet Claus Raasted and discuss his enormously successful Indiegogo campaign. Claus is a really fun, fascinating guest who is suitably passionate about what he and his team create. You may not be familiar with live-action roleplay, but they are on the vanguard of something special. It just may be the future of storytelling.
We're a relatively new form of expression. The only difference here is that instead of being a spectator, you're a participant. And while it's of course nice, I love watching movies, then here I get to be part of it. Maybe the acting's a bit less good. None of us are Johnny Depp. Maybe the budgets are a bit lower. Sadly, none of us have Pirates of the Caribbean budgets. But instead of watching the sword fights between the pirates or watching them sing drunken songs or whatever, you get to be a part of it. And that's insanely magical and a very strong experience.
Crowd Scene. Gonna kick it with Pete and Mike. Crowd Scene. Interviews behind the hype. Crowd Scene.
Hi there. Welcome to Crowd Scene, the show about successful crowdfunding campaigns and the people who make them happen. I'm Michael Ogden.
And I'm Peter Dean.
In each episode of Crowd Scene, we speak with people who have taken a risk by turning an idea of theirs into reality, by raising money on a crowdfunding platform. But what did it take to reach their goal? I like to hear the story behind the idea and discover what it meant for them to find success.
And I'm interested in how you design and plan a successful campaign, as well as what our guests have learned along the way. We'll talk about some of the factors that can make or break a campaign.
In this episode, we're joined from Denmark by Claus Raasted, the king of live-action roleplay. Also known as LARPs, that's L-A-R-P, live-action role-playing is where people playing characters come together in a themed setting and interact to create an original story. Hugely imaginative and inventive, these are large-scale events held over several days that can be challenging to create. It's growing in popularity around the world, but it's already big in Denmark.
Today, we're talking about a Harry Potter-themed weekend that Claus and his team successfully crowdfunded. They call the experience the College of Wizardry. Claus set out to raise $50,000 on Indiegogo to bring the College of Wizardry to life. By the end of the campaign, 764 live-action roleplay enthusiasts took the total amount raised up to $163,000. So, let's find out how he did it.
Claus will be sharing his insights and crowdfunding advice throughout the show, but first, let's hear his story. Claus Raasted, welcome to Crowd Scene.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations on your campaign.
Thanks a lot. We're also quite happy with it, so it's nice to have some other people use it as inspiration.
Do you mind that we called you the king of LARP?
I was going to say I might start out with correcting two small things. One is that
Please do.
While I definitely don't mind you calling me the king of LARP, I should probably say that I wouldn't be caught dead calling myself it. But I'm flattered, and you should keep on doing it, just so I can say that I've said I'm not really.
Well, our rationale is that live-action role-playing is really big in Denmark, probably bigger than anywhere else, and it sounds like you're the man in Denmark. So if you're
Ipso facto,
yeah,
the crowned king.
Well, when you put it like that, of course, how can I argue?
Yes, it's simple maths. Let's set the scene. For our listeners who aren't familiar with the College of Wizardry and live-action roleplay, how would you describe it to someone who hadn't heard of it before?
The way I usually describe live-action roleplay is that you're part of call it improvised theater without a script. Mm-hmm. It's basically let's pretend, just like when kids play house or cowboys and Indians, except that we have better costumes and more complex stories.
And in preparing for these events, I mean, is your background as a writer? Are you working with a writing team?
Well, I mean, preparing an event like this is a huge and complex process. There's some writing involved. There's some marketing involved. There's some logistics, production involved. Think of if you were to make a theater piece or a show for a theater audience, except that the audience should also participate. And instead of having just a stage and a lot of chairs, then you need a really big stage so that everything happens on the stage. In this case, our stage is a castle. It's a quite nice stage.
And did you first begin as a fan of live-action roleplay? Were you a participant before you became a creator?
Yes, I started playing back in 1993, many years ago. Mm-hmm. And then in 1995, some people asked me if I wanted to join the organization we had as a helping organizer. And I never looked back.
And that live-action roleplay, I mean, was that inspired by a book or a film back then in 93?
No, most LARPs back then, not all, but most were inspired by some kind of Tolkien-esque fantasy medieval something. If you basically took most of the bad fantasy literature that came out of the 70s and 80s and squashed it together, then you find a lot of the backstory for many LARPs, and still do. A lot of them take place in this somewhat Tolkien, somewhat Dragonlance, somewhat, what else can we think of? Somewhat fantasy medieval world. Mixing a little bit of World of Warcraft now, because that's what kids have as a reference.
So, but before you got into doing this full time, did you have a regular job that you had to leave in order to pursue this?
Actually, I was dumb enough to start doing this when I was 23. So I was a university student. I studied philosophy and history. And then I live in Denmark, and a little context there is that we get paid to study. Lucky bastards living in a very nice country. So you actually get paid to study in Denmark. And at some point, the state says, well, you haven't completed enough courses. You're 1 year behind your studies. Now we're not going to pay you anymore unless you kind of catch up. And I took a long, hard look in the mirror and decided that instead of trying to catch up on my studies, I didn't even have a bachelor's degree. I was halfway. I thought I could try do something else. And I already did some part-time teaching in LARP and thought maybe it was worthwhile seeing if I could make a living of my hobby. That was almost 13 years ago.
It seems to be working out.
Well, I won't say that it works out every day of the month except for the one when everybody else gets paid.
Can you describe how the College of Wizardry then came about?
First off, I think I should correct another small misconception that the College of Wizardry events started off as Harry Potter events.
Okay.
But the ones we did crowdfund for November are not Harry Potter.
Okay.
Because we had a talk with Warner Brothers, who owns the rights to do Harry Potter events, and they said, what you've done now is fine. You seem like dedicated fans. You've done interesting things. But after 3 events, you need to do your own thing. You need to create your own fictional world that's not Harry Potter. They needed to control their own brand.
Did that feel like a setback, or was that expected?
It was a very unexpected challenge, I think I'll call it, because it's not something we're used to. Basically, any kind of IP holder, whether you're the person who controls the rights to Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or anything big, you don't really care if somebody does a Star Wars children's birthday or a Star Wars party. But the moment something gets big enough, 10,000 people doing a Star Wars party, or it gets enough media attention, then you suddenly need to take an interest in it. And that was what happened with us. We got global exposure. The video from our LARP got seen by about 1 million people online, and it was in People Magazine, USA Today, all over basically most major news outlets in the Western Hemisphere picked it up, and that's never, ever happened before to a LARP. So for us, it was a new thing.
Do you think this is the first time a lot of people have heard of a LARP, thanks to the video you created for this?
I think that it's not the first time a lot of people have heard of a LARP, but it's definitely the first time a lot of people have heard of LARP that's not orcs and elves in the forest. Or for the American scene, that's not some people in costumes yelling lightning bolt at each other. So for LARP has been around for quite some time, but has varying media images all over the world. In Denmark, it's relatively well known, but mostly as a children's hobby. Very positive spin on it, but it's mostly known to be something for kids. In the US, it's seen as this nerdy, geeky pastime for people who live in their parents' basements. This is, of course, not true. That's kind of the media impression of it. And all kinds of ideas are in between in other countries. So one of the big advantages with College of Wizardry was that here was an easy-to-understand story. You go to a real castle, you dress up, and you pretend to be a witch or a wizard for 4 days at a magical college. And it looked amazing because it was as an actual magical castle with secret passages and all. People looked good because they were in costume, and there was a nice production value to the video. So most people looked at it and thought, wow, this looks interesting. And that is, if not the first time it's happened, it's the first time it's happened on anything like a global scale.
Well, certainly the subject matter as well. I mean, there's so many fans of Harry Potter. So as a gateway to that world, it was something maybe more relatable than some of the fantasy elements of other LARPs.
Well, you could also say that Lord of the Rings is rather well known, but I think what we did here was we came closer to recreating something that looked like something out of the movies. I mean, when somebody does a LARP that's inspired by Lord of the Rings or any other fantasy setting, the dragons are hard. And the 6,000 horsemen on the Pelennor fields, they're more like 20 guys on bicycles.
It's a stretch goal, right?
Yeah. At that point, you get
it look like something from the movies for most of the things.
I think maybe one of the reasons that the video was so popular was that you didn't talk directly to the fans who already are immersed in this culture. You explained it very clearly. You told people what a LARP was. And certainly for someone like me who didn't really know much about this, I felt after watching your video that I had a decent understanding of it.
Oh, but that's very nice. Thank you for that. That was, of course, not the video that went viral, but that was our Indiegogo video. The viral video had no explanation whatsoever. Oh. It was 1 minute and 40 and had only music. We got a nice Finnish composer to do a piece of original music for us. And it had that, but no explanation of what was going on.
So Klaus, was there a particular moment that sparked this particular campaign?
Yes. This particular thing was sparked, as many good ideas are in creative businesses or creative organizations, at 4 a.m. in the morning. And I was talking to this Polish guy, Draken Dębinski, our creative lead on College of Wizardry, who I had just met earlier before at an international LARP conference. And we were drunk, and he was telling me about how Poland was 1/4 of German prices, but the same quality, and showing me pictures of castles. And then I asked, what does a castle like this cost to rent? And then he told me a price, and I didn't believe him, but said that if he wasn't lying, then we should talk more when we were sober. And it turns out that he wasn't that far off the mark price-wise. His prices were a bit old, but they were still quite nice. And then we contacted the castle, made arrangements to rent the whole thing, and threw up a webpage saying, we're doing this thing. And me and my fellow game designer, Charles Bill Nielsen, another Dane, we had a long talk with each other about what price could we charge. This was a volunteer-only project, but what price could we charge and make sure that people would actually pay it, because this was kind of in the high end of things. And also, how many people could we get? And we agreed that with our extensive international networks and half a year of dedicated work and a very low price, we could get 100 people if we were lucky. And it turned out that 48 hours after, it was completely sold out with a long waiting list.
Incredible.
So there was more interest than we'd accounted for.
So that initial spark, though, is that location. For our listeners, can you describe that castle?
The castle is a medieval Polish fairy tale castle. It has, if you watch a movie, think of it as a small Game of Thrones castle with secret corridors and a tower from the 18th century. If somebody had shown the castle as a kind of a small version of Hogwarts, or introduced in the Harry Potter movies, like this is a German magic school, nobody would have wondered about it. It looks like something out of a fairy tale.
So can I ask you, when you read Harry Potter, the books, was there a moment where, given your background and your experience, did you think, hey, this would make a great live action role playing experience, or was it the castle that it took to remind you that?
Funnily enough, when I read the books first, I was 21 when I read the first one, and I thought it was very funny. I laughed so much my then girlfriend said I had to go into the other room because she wanted to sleep with the first 30 pages. But I didn't really think of it as doing a LARP about it. That came a lot later. That actually came earlier in 2014 when discussing what to do, what kind of big project to do with another friend. And then we thought, maybe do a Harry Potter project. It should be easy to do something in a school setting. We should be able to get some kind of location that's nice, and let's try doing something for adults. That project never happened because we couldn't find anything within our price range. But then suddenly this Polish castle turned up during a drunken late night talk. And then I thought, whoa, this is perfect for that half-baked project. And it turns out that the Poles already had come at it from the other angle. They wanted to do a Harry Potter project at that castle, but didn't have the resources economically or the international network to attract foreigners enough for it. So they'd given up on that as well. So we had 2 half-completed Harry Potter projects, and suddenly they met each other.
Right time.
Mm-hmm. Right timing, right people, right place. And of course, anything started at 4 a.m. can only turn out to be magnificent.
So long as you remember in the morning, of course.
Yes. Very true.
So I just want to talk a little bit more about live action role playing. Now we know it's kind of catching on around the world, and it's much bigger in Denmark. And Mike and I were talking before the show about how Denmark is always top of those polls of where the happiest people live and the best countries to live. Why is it then that it's people in Denmark that want to take a step back and away from their real lives and do a live action role playing game?
I think one of the first misconceptions we run into when talking with people about LARP is, why do you participate in a LARP? We have a few couple of sentences about it in the crowdfunding video and also in the video on our webpage. But the simple truth is that the reason you participate in a LARP is the same reason that you read a book or watch a movie. You want to escape reality for some time. Maybe it's a few hours, maybe it's a few days, maybe it's in bits and pieces, and you either want to explore some other world or some other time or some other people, some other situation, or you want to have fun or learn something about yourself or the world. And usually when somebody says, oh, but why are movies so popular in France? Nobody will say, but France is such a nice country. Why do you want to escape reality and watch movies? Or read books even? But we're up against that because we're a relatively new form of expression. The only difference here is that instead of being a spectator, then you're a participant. And while it's, of course, nice, I love watching movies, then here I get to be part of it. Maybe the acting's a bit less good. None of us are Johnny Depp. Maybe the budgets are a bit lower. Sadly, none of us have Pirates of the Caribbean budgets. But instead of watching the sword fights between the pirates or watching them sing drunken songs or whatever, you get to be a part of it. And that's insanely magical and a very strong experience. So I think the only way to answer the question is to turn it around and say, why are books and movies and poems and anything else so popular? Do people want to escape reality or what?
That makes sense.
Thank you.
Sometimes people might not be better as performers, or the production values aren't going to be the same. I mean, one thing I suppose about books is that it's a personal experience where you're reading into the fiction. With this, the magic happens between people connecting with each other and interacting with each other, which, as you say, can be really powerful and magical. Can the spell be broken if the performances are poor?
Yes, definitely. The spell can easily be broken. It's also a very fragile art form. It doesn't take more than one person suddenly seeing the humor in a situation where it shouldn't be and doubling over, laughing, or somebody not really realizing what's going on or misinterpreting signals. A classic will be somebody screams out in pain and the other player will say, are you all right? And I'll say, yeah, play on. I'm fine. That sort of thing happens all the time. But it does mean that it's easy. It's relatively easy to pretend to be somebody else. Mm-hmm. Most of us do that at some points in our lives. We've all done it as kids. Mm-hmm. Some of us do it when we're visiting our family-in-law or at work or whatever. So we're used to putting on these roles. Mm-hmm. And here, when everybody does it, there's this shared fiction that means that you're trying your best. And of course, it sometimes gets a little bit weird, especially the more fantastic it is. Mm-hmm. It is really hard standing in the forest saying with a straight face, I am the elven prince Arondir, and you have trespassed on our lands. It's really hard taking yourself seriously then, and it takes some training to get over that hurdle.
Before a live action event begins, do you provide some of that training? Do you kind of workshop?
Yes. Of course, LARPs as movies or books are done in a million different ways. But for many LARPs, it's popular either to have some preparation beforehand with your group, if you're going with a group, or reading up on something, or doing some short workshops before the game. Some games, especially the Swedish tradition, has very many long workshops where you use like a day or two to prepare before you start playing. Mm-hmm. Some have a few hours before the game. Some don't even have any. But it definitely helps. Just looking the person who's going to play your long-lost lover in the eye and saying, hi, I'm Klaus. Oh, I'm Peter. We're going to have loved each other for 20 years and are now estranged. Okay, this is maybe good to know.
And when that happens, is that maybe the first time you're meeting that person?
Sometimes it is, especially for an event like College of Wizardry, which is international. So people travel from, I think for the next one we have from 25 different countries. And it means there's a lot of preparation and talks beforehand in Facebook groups and mails back and forth. But in the end, when you arrive, suddenly there's somebody who's going to be playing, either sharing a room with you or having some kind of shared backstory, or maybe just be in your class or your professor, and you've never met the person before. It also gives the strange duality. A friend of mine who's LARPed for many years, the now famous archer Lars Anderson, the Danish guy with the fastest archer in the world, started shooting bows and arrows because he's a LARPer. At some point wrote a column for our Danish LARP magazine saying that I may know this guy, but maybe I don't know him at all. I mean, his point was that he played with people for years, but he didn't know who they were when they weren't playing. Because the LARP he was playing at, you meet once a month, you go out in the forest, you do magical stuff, and then you go back. But nobody meets up beforehand, and you leave at separate times. So he said, maybe I know this Yen character. I might have played with him for years, but to me, he's Gorham the elf or whatever. So I don't necessarily know who he is in real life. I just know his character.
So, Klaus, we've heard about the concept of bleed, where someone's experience in a live-action roleplay bleeds into their real life. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, the concept of bleed is quite simple, but also very complex. In essence, it's if you take something with you from the real world into a game, or if you take something from the game and back into the real world.
Yeah.
Basically, it happens all the times in movies where the male and female lead end up becoming a real life couple after the movie. Is a great example of it. Because if you do something, especially something that's emotionally engaging or challenging, well, you have these strong experiences. And no matter if you have it with fake people because they're playing characters, you still have the experience, and you still look at it in a different light afterwards.
So you've given us a very positive example there, but are there...
It might as well be a bad one. I mean, if I play a slave in a Roman LARP, and the person playing my master kicks me every time he sees me, then afterwards I need to do a little bit of talking with the real person, not to just think this guy is an asshole.
Does that sort of thing happen?
Yeah, of course. And especially it happens less and less because we're becoming better, both at setting better frameworks, but also becoming more aware that this happens. So spending more time on debriefing and de-rolling and talking things out afterwards. Just going over to the person who's tortured you and having a beer together at an after party and getting a feel for the real person does a lot. Yeah. But when I started, and especially when I started doing some of the more heavy emotional games, we weren't as good at this. And that meant that sometimes you had these powerful experiences and you never even talked afterwards. Right. So, of course, even though you know intellectually it's a game, it's still been somebody who's been yelling at you or abusing you or just beating you with a latex weapon.
Well, also I imagine, and I'm sure this happens in film too, if you're an actor on movie sets, but if you've had kind of an intense relationship with someone who you say you're acting opposite in the live action role play, and it's a romantic interest, and you've had this powerful experience, and then you leave the weekend and you go home to your wife who hasn't participated, having her part of that experience has got to be a challenge sometimes.
Yes, of course. Just in the same ways as it is for actors. It sometimes is a challenge. And that means that there are people who are in committed relationships where they just stay away from that sort of character or that sort of game because they don't want to get even near it because it can get complicated. There are those who have experience with it and know how to separate things, and there are those who get into a hell of a lot of trouble.
Well, can I ask you, Klaus, I mean, through your experience of watching all these stories unfold and over the many years you've been involved with live action role playing and seeing people immerse themselves deeply in characters, I mean, what have you learned about human behavior and what surprised you?
Oh, that's a tough question. I was about to say I've learned a lot, but that doesn't really say anything. One of the things I have definitely learned is that it's really hard after playing 20 different characters in 20 different fictional stories, not coming to the conclusion that maybe the character I play in my daily life is character number 21. Maybe identity is more fluid than mainstream society wants us to believe. And this spills over in everything. This spills over in political views. This especially spills over in views on gender, sexuality, power structures, etc. It's really hard if you've been a LARPer for a long time, playing a variety of different stuff, not to question some of the values we're force-fed by normal society.
I think that philosophy degree is paying off.
Yeah, that also maybe helps. But this is not just me who thinks this. I mean, basically, after you play, there's a very famous LARP from 2003 called Between Heaven and Sea, or in Swedish, Mellan himmel och hav, which was a sci-fi game, and it removed the traditional genders, introduced 4-person couple instead of 2-person couples, and they were comprised of 2 morning people and 2 evening people. So for the 72 hours I think it lasted, people ignored their usual performed or physical gender, biological gender, and then they played either one of these morning people or one of the evening people who were defined by a series of traits. And afterwards, a lot of them came home with a new understanding, or at least some new thoughts about how everyday gender is perceived. Mm-hmm. Because once you've tried being a morning person, then maybe you realize that some of the attributes we we say are feminine or masculine, maybe this is not necessarily linked to what's between your legs, but more linked to what kind of cultural situation we're in.
Describe that about the person you're comfortable with being as that 21st character. I also kind of heard that as being maybe you are not just your job. I mean, how often people go, what do you do for a living? And your identity is so wrapped up in your occupation. Is that?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
It's one of a couple of the strongest identity markers we have today, in my experience at least, is our jobs, our educations, and our gender, sadly. For one of the nationalities, also really huge. If I tell somebody, oh, I'm American, then they'll have me pegged with a lot of things. If I tell them that I'm British instead, then they will believe something completely different.
Especially if he's talking a convincing accent.
You hear those accents?
Yeah.
Especially if I have such a bad British accent, they'll just think I'm some kind of weirdo.
It's better than Mike's.
That's better than my British accent. Hello there, Pip.
But no, and learning that some of these identity signifiers are something you can turn on and off. Because if you can convincingly play a blacksmith, of course, I don't have any actual blacksmithing skills, so that's going to be hard. But I could easily, instead of saying I studied philosophy, you yourself said earlier, oh, the philosophy degree, that could just have been a lie because I wanted to appear interesting and cool. I might have been studying to be an archaeologist, which is completely different. But if I'm able to convince somebody of something else, then it becomes fluid. And then, of course, we shouldn't attribute as much meaning to things that are fluid because they're easily changeable.
So do you find yourself testing out characters in real life outside of those weekends, just like when you're at a party?
No, not really, because I have all the opportunities to do it in safe, controlled spaces where everybody agrees.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a common thing, but a lot of people, I guess, have tried going to a party pretending to be somebody else.
Yes.
Suddenly, and we sometimes did it in my circle of friends. Many years ago, we'd play the yes game, which was basically you weren't allowed to introduce yourself at a party. Somebody else had to do it. And then you just went along with it. So sometimes I'd be a student of architecture who just returned from India. Sometimes I'd be something a little bit weird. A couple of friends were boat builders for an evening. And of course, the problem with that is that it erodes the general trust level between strangers. If I go up to somebody and ask them, where is City Hall? And they point the other way because they're experimenting with being idiots, then that doesn't really lead me to City Hall.
Yep.
And we want to be able to trust people for being who they are. And one of the nice things about setting up these fictional spaces is that we already know that people are not who they say. They're who they are right now. So we can trust them to be the orc or the rock star or the wizard or whatever without necessarily judging who they are normally. So you get to have this very safe experimentation instead of experimenting in normal society where it's really easy to get into trouble if you experiment too much. Oh, I'm a policeman. Sorry, sir, you really are not. Now you're going to meet the actual policeman.
That's right. I need a doctor. I'm a doctor.
Yes. Exactly.
Yes, that's a good game.
Well, you mentioned that yes and. I mean, that's a classic improv exercise. You mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we're about to get to crowdfunding or talk a bit more about that. But I was just curious before we get to that, how do you see the relationship between live action role play and things like virtual reality? How might that impact on what you're developing in the future?
It's a really good question. I've, of course, looked at some VR stuff and thought, oh, this looks incredibly awesome. On the other hand, one of our strongest draws is the human factor. Because, of course, people have made online worlds for a long time, but making a pretend physical world that feels real to a point is a completely different experience from making an online world. Of course, the better VR gets, the more we're going to be in competition with that. Or maybe we'll be the ones designing it and somebody else will be supplying the hardware. Because if we can create a believable, or at least a strong impression of a wizard world, even with no magic, then what if we got some VR tools and we're able to do the magic as well?
It's going to overlap one day.
It's going to be interesting. I have no clue where it's going to go, but I wish that we had funds, respect, and authority enough to be some of those calling the shots in the VR business. We're not. So we're going to have to see where it takes us.
In terms of the design of that experience, though, do you always start with the rules of the world or the story or the characters? Where do you start?
Basically, I think it's like asking somebody how to start a book. The answers are so varied that they don't really make sense. I've started, there was one LARP that we started designing because we were drunk at a party and somebody dared us to do it. and gave us a ridiculous title, and then we actually did the LARP. There are some LARPs where we think, okay, we should do this because nobody else has done it. Sometimes you have a character you want to see in action or a location you want to use. I think for me personally, I always start out, if I can, with the location, because it's a lot easier doing a submarine LARP or designing one if you have a submarine than finding a submarine if you want to do a submarine LARP.
That makes sense. That'd be a pretty cool LARP, though.
Yeah,
a submarine.
difficult to organize.
I've been lucky enough to play in one.
So let's move along and talk about crowdfunding.
Yes.
Why did you decide to crowdfund this?
I think the reason we wanted to crowdfund it was to test the waters. Basically, every time, if looked at it in the right perspective, every time you create any kind of event or product or anything and you put a price on it and it'll fail if not enough people decide to jump on board, then you're basically crowdfunding. I mean, if I set up a music concert, and I say the tickets are available, they're on this website, they cost $100 each, and I know personally that I need 800 people to pay for it to work, and if not, I'm going to lose money, and if there are 200 people, I'm going to lose my home as well. Then that's crowdfunding, and that's been done for years and years. The trick about crowdfunding is that there are more variables, and it's a more clear process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And had you done any crowdfunding campaigns before?
Nope, none before. I've done a lot of those kind of, here's an event. So a lot of the simple style of crowdfunding, but never any crowdfunding before.
And why did you choose Indiegogo for this?
Because I actually didn't think that Kickstarter would work when we were in Denmark.
Okay.
I remember looking into it a couple of years back when it started gaining momentum, and then it said Kickstarter is only for the US. And I never updated my info, so we looked at Indiegogo. It looked fine. Another reason for us choosing Indiegogo for our campaign was that we were contacted by this American enthusiast, Bob McCauley, who was a huge help in doing it. He had experience with Indiegogo from before and also knew some people at the Indiegogo company. So that was two good reasons for choosing to use that instead of Kickstarter.
And did you need to convince anyone on your team that crowdfunding was a good idea?
I think... I don't know. Charles, my partner in crime on this, is laughing his ass off right now at our office. I don't think we need to convince anyone that it was a good idea. I think we maybe should have looked more critically at, was it really a good idea? But I think just the fact that nobody had done it before was also a tempting factor. There'd been one crowdfunded event before, but that'd been run on a more of a private crowdfunding style platform. Instead of using one of the big ones. So we wanted to try that out.
What would you have done if you hadn't crowdfunded the College of Wizardry?
Then we would just have done like we normally do. Announce an event, spread it as well as we can, and hope for enough people to sign up. We're doing another event in November at a different Polish castle. It's called Fairweather Manor and is inspired by the TV series Downton Abbey. So basically we take another Polish castle and make it into a 1914 British manor, with people playing servants and aristocrats and intellectuals, artists, that sort of thing. And for this, we just made a web page, opened the sign up, and got a lot of people who were interested with no crowdfunding at all.
And you're doing Robin Hood as well, is that right?
Yes, but we've had to move the Robin Hood LARP to 2016 because Lars Anderson, our archery expert, got an offer he couldn't refuse for that date. So we're going to do it next year instead.
So Harry Potter, Robin Hood, Downton Abbey, what's your criteria for what can make a good adaptation to a live-action role-play experience?
Well, I mean, we both work with adaptations and original work, but I think for something to make a good adaptation, you need to find a story that's relatively well-known. I mean, choosing some obscure Danish writer nobody's heard about isn't really going to help you for your international game. What a known universe does is that it shortcuts a lot of the questions. Mm-hmm. If I say I'm going to make a game set in the fictional world of Skardamar, and it's going to be about the Bushkabars and their quest for dominance, you're going to go, what? The who? The what?
This sounds awesome.
Is it in the submarine?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm there.
And then you're there anyway.
Yeah, with British accents.
Do it in the Star Trek universe, and it's about the Romulans and their quest for dominance. Then I already shortcut into, I get a lot of things for free, so to speak.
Yes, I guess you're creating a language between the participants.
Yes, you're basically using reference points. It also means that if you're doing something else, you find a reference point. And another game that we did couple of years ago, an old Norwegian one we did a remake of is called Panopticorp. And in Panopticorp, you play this soulless ad agency that never says no to a job because of morals. And it's a very high-powered, basically madmen on speed, just set in the modern world, with no morals at all.
But smoking, there's lots of smoking, right?
I wish there was. There's a lot of partying and drinking, and probably fake smoking and fake coke, yes. Tons of that.
So we'd like to talk about the way you prepared your campaign, as that's a hugely important part of crowdfunding these days. Can you talk us through the pre-campaign work you did and give us your 3 best bits of advice on planning and organizing a crowdfunding campaign?
Well, basically, the way we started our campaign was we want to do a crowdfunding campaign, and then we made a mock-up webpage, and then wanted to press go immediately. And then Bob said, yeah, maybe we can launch in 3 months.
Smart guy, Bob.
And then I talked him down to 6 weeks.
So you
wasn't happy about it.
What did Bob tell you? What did he say to you?
He said first you need to use a lot of time kind of refining the page, making sure that everything works. There are the right questions answered. The video is good. There are good pictures. Then you need to get in contact with a lot of journalists, make sure they have some stories set up, and then kind of explode with a bang. And we just basically wanted to press go and see where it took us. But I'm glad we listened at least a little bit to his advice.
What did you do in that pre-campaign that was the most effective?
I think the most effective was writing to journalists and getting some stories set up for when it launched. On the other hand, that was also problematic because one of the journalists didn't really get the this is going to start in 3 weeks thing and just wrote an article right away.
Right. Okay. When you're reaching out to those journalists, you're reaching out by email and you've got a compelling subject line and a very quick, simple pitch, or did you do something different?
We had a little bit of an unfair advantage. We already had a project to refer to that had gotten global press attention.
Right.
So we started out by just writing to a bunch of journalists saying, you've already written about our project. Now we're going to crowdfund something that is quite similar to it. Okay. Are you interested in writing about that? And there were some who weren't, especially because we didn't have the Harry Potter pull effect anymore, because this was definitely not Harry Potter. But some were very interested and wrote about it. So we did get a shitload of media attention on it. So I think if I was gonna give some advice on what to do before, the first thing is that the page actually matters and the video matters a lot.
Yeah.
We were going to start out with a high production value, awesome piece of video, and then due to complications with Warner Brothers or misunderstandings or what it's supposed to be called, we ended up needing to do a new one because they didn't want us using footage from the old events, which was fair enough, but it was something that we found out in kind of the last week before we were going to launch. So if I'm going to give advice, it should be that make sure that your video is compelling. I've watched a lot of other Indiegogo videos, and some of them are awesome, and some of them are utter crap. Some of them are obviously some guy who's taken an iPhone, given it to a friend who might be sober at the time, and say, film me while I talk. And almost no matter how charismatic you are and how interesting the project is, it gets really boring really fast.
And did you talk to Indiegogo during the pre-campaign?
Yes, we talked a little bit to them. Not a lot. They were very helpful. We just weren't very good at utilizing their help because we were very, how should we call it? Self-running,
Yes, self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient was the word I was looking for. Thank you. Yes.
Would you use them differently on the next campaign?
Yes. If we're going to do another big campaign, then I definitely get in contact with them before and to hear what they can do for us. First off, I had no idea that they could actually do anything for us or that they were going to. I just thought they provided the platform that was that. But it turns out they both help with kind of getting your page crafted if you ask them nicely enough and getting it exposed and then coming up with kind of updates and tips and advice on the way. But since we had Bob as our in-house expert and are very much doers ourselves, for better or worse, then we didn't really take get much advantage out of that.
Your campaign goal, Claus, was $50,000. Where did that number come from?
Well, that was another thing that I advise people on, is that if you're doing a campaign, make it very clear what you're crowdfunding and don't mix stuff together, which is exactly the opposite of what we did. Because basically,
How so?
Basically, we wanted to crowdfund an event We'd done some events, we wanted to crowdfund an event. And if we got more money, we'd crowdfund 2 events. If we got a lot of more money, we'd crowdfund 3. And if things went totally bonkers to the moon and got us the same amount of global attention and response as with the first LARP, then we were going to buy a castle in Poland. You can guess what about 95% of all media heard.
Yeah.
Friends too. Oh, you're going to buy a castle. Well, we want to do events, and then if that goes well, we want to buy the castle. How's it going with the castle? Have you bought the castle? Here's the castle. Do you want to buy it?
What's it like living in that castle? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think if we had been smart, we would have done a campaign for either doing events with the more money getting the more events, or doing a campaign with buying something and with $10,000 getting us a shed in Warsaw, $50,000 getting us some apartment, and $500,000 getting us an actual castle.
Yeah, I think it's only right that the king of LARP should live in a castle.
Of course. Sadly, it's going to be Charles who lives in the castle if we get it.
Nice work, Charles.
I'm going to move down there and have a butler.
I'm curious, just before you went live with the campaign, Klaus, you and Charles, you put us right there in the room. Where were you? Who were you with? What were you thinking right the night before?
We were at our office. We share an office. Since I'm self-employed, I have a small company that does this sort of thing when I'm not doing it as a volunteer. So we use it both for our paid projects and our unpaid ones. So we were at our office, and we were thinking, okay, what's going to happen now? How many people are going to buy tickets right off the bat? What media stories are going to come out? How fast is this going to explode? Because we'd seen it go. We'd seen the first thing go viral in December, and we knew we were in uncharted territory. So of course we were a little bit nervous that nothing was going to happen, and we were also excited because maybe it was going to go to the moon. And then 15 minutes in, we had $15,000 in, and that seemed like a good start. And then it slowed down immensely.
Klaus, tell us about your backers. Who are they, and why do you think they responded so positively to the College of Wizardry?
Our backers are mainly live role players who already have experience. Some had played our former events, the ones that were actually Harry Potter events instead of this kind of our own universe. So some were returning people. Some were new people. And then we got a surprising amount of people who didn't know anything about LARP or who hadn't tried out LARP before but thought, this looks so awesome, I need to be part of it.
Interesting.
People who'd read about it in an online article or seen a video about it somewhere and then thought, wow, this sounds totally crazy and I can be a part of it. I want to go there. So we've gotten a lot of backers who had no clue as to who we were or as to what LARP was before, or if they did, they had very little idea and didn't think that it involved something like this.
Just curious, Klaus, I mean, when you get those two groups together, do you foresee any challenges?
Yes, of course, getting experienced people together with non-experienced people is a challenge. On the other hand, getting LARPers from Italy, LARPers from the US, and LARPers from Spain and Sweden together is also a challenge because they come with their own preconceptions. In some ways, if you have enough of a kind of, shall we call it a strong core or a strong herd, then new people are nothing but a bonus. We work with a term called herd competence. That if there are 20% new people and they see the 80% behaving in a certain way, they just assume, oh, so we're supposed to be like kind of semi-skilled actors and take this seriously and do awesome and interesting things. So I'm going to do that too. While if you have 100% new people, they're just going to look at each other and go, okay, I don't know what to do.
Right.
So people become more skilled if you put them together with people who already have experience.
And when you get people from all over the world coming together like this, is there an assumption that you're all going to speak English together? Is that the international language of live action role playing?
We're very clear on the fact that this is all English. It may not be the international language of all live action role playing, but it is the international language of almost all.
And is there any significant difference there may not be between, say, an American live action role play experience and a Danish one?
There are huge differences between live action role play experiences around the world. There's a ton of difference between an American one, and a Danish one, and an Italian one, and even in the different countries, there are huge differences. And all the time there are fights about creative differences or logistical differences or ethical differences or styles of play. And it was basically what we have is an emerging hobby that's becoming globalized, and it's trying to encompass everything. basically like saying, are there differences between books? Except that here the readers also get to write in the books while they're reading.
Do you think that it's growing in popularity because just more people are hearing about it, or is there another factor?
I think there are several reasons for it growing in popularity. One is that more people hear about it. And of course, every time somebody hears about something new, some will say, nah, some will say, yes, this is what I've been looking for. So kind of just simply spreading the information is a good start. Something like football, everybody has an opinion on it. Either you've tried it or you haven't tried it, you love it or you hate it, but you know it's there. While with something like LARP, that's still not true in most of the world. So just spreading information is one factor. Another is that we're getting older. And it means we're getting better at talking about it. I wasn't as eloquent when I was 16, sadly. I had less experience explaining what it is we actually do in an understandable way. It also means we get better budgets and can do more interesting stuff. If we'd done exactly the same game at a Danish public school with black sheets as robes, then it wouldn't have drawn the same level of interest, even though the system behind and the characters would have been the same. So budget is also a factor, and we're also getting older, which means that we get more political influence, sounds so bad, but more cultural influence. We have more access being in our 30s, 40s, and 50s than when we were teenagers. I mean, during the last year, I've talked with a couple of Danish ministers about LARP and what it can do. I didn't really have that access when I was 16. And I'm glad I didn't.
Can I ask you, you mentioned a minute ago about raising the $15,000 in a matter of hours. Was that first day your best day in terms of the experience, or was there a different day? What was the best day of your campaign?
The best day of our campaign was just after we'd done an event in Poland, and the campaign was still running. So basically, we did 2 events in April, and we were still doing the campaign for the events in November. And after the first event in April, there were so many who said, I want to do this again. Even though it's going to be different, I want to do this again. I want to go back. And they bought tickets like crazy. And then after we did the second event, there was the same reaction.
Was there something that surprised you about the campaign?
I was surprised at how many people we had no clue who supported us, how many strangers who decided this is an interesting project and supported us with $5, $10, $20, whatever. That surprised me. One thing was people deciding, I want to be part of this, or I want a magical wand. I mean, some kind of service, or I want something out of it. But people just chipping in money because it looked interesting. There was a surprising amount of those. And that was, of course, very heartwarming.
Was there ever a moment where you thought this campaign is not going to reach your goal?
Yes. After the first couple of days when things slowed down immensely, I thought, is this actually going to happen? And then luckily, it turned around and exploded. But also, this was our first crowdfunding campaign. We didn't really understand how things worked. And also, we didn't realize that what is the incentive for buying something in the middle of a campaign? It's basically zero, unless there's a rush. If there's a rush on a certain perk, or in this instance, it was tickets, then of course there's a rush. But with something like 130 tickets for an event, when it's at 20, nobody's going to buy 21. But there might be 100 people sitting out there being ready to pounce when it starts moving. But nobody wants to move first, because why not do it tomorrow?
During the days, Claus, when the campaign was in a bit of a lull, what did you do to keep going and motivate yourself and generate more interest in the idea?
Mostly we ran around screaming and panicking and yelling at each other and questioning our decisions and trying to remake everything.
Were you quite organized and sending out emails on a sort of daily basis, or were you just playing it by ear?
We were very much playing it by ear, and sometimes by Bob's excellent advice, which we ignored most of the time. Also, there's for us as Danes, there's something strange about crowdfunding. I don't know how much you know about Danish national character, but even the most kind of forward and look at me of us are a little bit hesitant to write to somebody and ask them for money. I did at some point, I used a service called Green Inbox, which wrote out to all my Facebook contacts, there are about 2,400 or so, with some kind of standardized message saying, hi, I'm doing this project, please support it. And a lot of people supported it, gave in a couple of $1,000s because of that message out, and it was undeniably effective. But still, the fact that there were 10 people who wrote me and said, this is not cool, don't come begging, made me think, ouch, I don't want to do that again.
Huh, interesting. And what was the name of that tool? It was Green Inbox.
Green Inbox. Very efficient, very simple, very intuitive. I would recommend it to anybody who is better than me at ignoring when people say, hey, don't spam me with your shit.
Yeah, you've got to have a thick skin, I think.
Yeah, and as Bob said there, Klaus and Charles, if you want to raise $1 million for a castle, you're going to step on some toes and you need to pull some friendship points. And if you're going to do it via crowdfunding, then you need to ask people for money.
Yeah.
We weren't really happy about that, so we did it very little. But every time we did it, it gave money and it also gave us some heartache.
We've had a previous guest who said you've got to be shameless, when you're out doing a crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah, and I think if you're shameless, do it in a nice way. And if you're not shameless, then try to do it once or twice, but mainly stay shamed, I think, is a better piece of advice.
Stay shamed.
Because the other thing might seem like a better idea in the short run, but in the long run, I don't know.
Do you feel by being you're publicly crowdfunding, does this project as a result feel more personal? Were you more vulnerable?
Nah, not really. Not really. Artistically, it's basically the same project that we're now doing for the fourth, fifth, and sixth time. So not so much in that respect. I guess one thing I do feel is that we've learned a lot about how to crowdfund. We've just completed another crowdfunding project about a book and are helping some others with a different crowdfunding project. But I think most of all, I've learned what not to do for the next time.
Okay.
So I've become a lot wiser.
I'm curious about your relationship with Warner Brothers and with the Harry Potter, changing it to College of Wizardry. Can you imagine, though, also, or I can imagine a future where you might be working collaboratively with some of these movie studios to take their properties and adapt it to live action role play?
Our dream was, of course, to work with them. Mm-hmm. If they had just given their go-ahead, not even given money or anything, but just just keep on what you're doing, then there would have been champagne and dancing and rockets to the moon. Yeah. On the other hand, we understand why. It's for them, it's something completely off the bat and strange. But of course, there's going to be a future where this happens, and it's going to start small. We're already at the moment working with the biggest fantasy author in Denmark, Josefine Ottesen, doing LARPs with her and using her books as setups for our LARPs and doing things together. But that's kind of in a smaller scale because Denmark's a smaller country.
Right. A good testing ground.
Good testing ground. And others, some of our friends are doing work of a similar nature with others, with different IPs. So it's going to happen. We've been contacted by one American author who wanted us to do a LARP about his books. So it's going to happen, and it's happening slowly. But I think it's going to be still some time before somebody like Disney or Warner Brothers just goes all in, because to them it's a risky step. First they need to understand it, then they need to trust it, then they need to say, okay, we're going to be the first ones. So I think it's going to start slow and build up, and at some point Warner Brothers is going to come knocking, maybe not on our door, but on somebody's door.
Mm-hmm. Will it lose some of the magic if there's a huge international corporation behind it?
It's a good question. I don't see any reason. It depends on how it's done. The way we do LARPs is very personal and very much based on creating an atmosphere of trust and play and togetherness, for any other word. I mean, we also create strong communities with these events.
Yeah.
And if you've been to Disneyland, it doesn't necessarily give you a strong emotional connection with everybody else who's been to Disneyland.
Let's just talk about that castle one more time. Now, it didn't happen during the campaign, but have you abandoned that idea, or is that still in the back of your mind as,
we're going to buy a castle in Poland. It's not going to happen today, and it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it will happen.
Cool.
And maybe we're not going to crowdfund it. We did get one serious investor out of the crowdfunding campaign who wants to be on board when it does happen. Somebody who bought the Gardener perk for $15,000 and 1% of the potential castle. So they're still on board for if we do this in the future.
I'd like to ask, you mentioned a second ago, Klaus, about champagne, dancing, rocket ships. What did that last day of the campaign feel like, and how did you all celebrate?
That's a good question. Did we celebrate?
He's forgotten.
Definitely had some champagne. I think there might have been champagne on the last day. There was also a little bit of doubt because we raised enough money to run 2 events and almost enough to run the third. So, of course, being us, we decided to announce we're going to run the third anyway and see if we could sell the remaining tickets kind of the conventional way. And we're still in the process of doing that. So, of course, we overreached.
So you'll be running these College of Wizardry weekends in about 5 months from now. What kind of challenges lie ahead between now and then?
Well, between now and then, for those events, right now we're in the middle of a character writing marathon, because even though we've done 3 events and the whole thing is kind of ready to go, right now we're taking it out of the Harry Potter universe and taking it into our own one. And that means that a lot of things, especially the written material, needs to be changed. If a character for a player is based on being a Quidditch champion or having parents that were in the magical prison of Azkaban, well, that needs to go, because that doesn't exist in our new fictional world.
Of course.
So there's a shitload of transition work ahead of us right now.
And it's not just a case of changing Quidditch to Zwidditch.
Well,
it's copyright infringing, I think.
Of course, but if we're going to go away from Harry Potter, then we don't want to unnecessarily provoke Warner Brothers with Zwidditch, no matter how legal it might or might not be. But also, we want to get away from some of the stuff we think is silly. And while Quidditch is, of course, fun and weird and strange and wizardy, it's a little bit silly having a magical sport that involves flying at a LARP where you can't fly.
Ah, fair
True.
point. Okay.
So Quidditch is more suited to movies with nice production budgets than to LARPs.
Right.
While some kind of American football with a troll ball, that might work better.
That sounds good. Okay.
You just need a catchy name now.
Yeah.
Dragon Ball. No, maybe not.
Before we get to your crowdfunding advice, back when you started live action role playing in your early days, you were inspired by writers, and you said kind of the fantasy writers. I mean, can you talk about who or what inspires you to do what you do? Because of course, live action role play isn't just about writing. It's quite a lot of different elements that have to be in play for you to pull these events off. Who inspires you?
A lot of my peers inspire me. Other people who do LARPs. Even though I laugh at him, Charles, my coworker here, inspires me. And I get inspired by movies, I get inspired by films, I get inspired by other LARPs, I get inspired by politics and by political movements, by life in general. And sometimes an idea will stick, and I think I want to do a LARP about physical norms and beauty standards. And then it turns out that's going to be too much work, or I can't find anybody to join on the project, and it kind of fizzes. Or sometimes I'll think of something else. I want to do a Robin Hood LARP here, and then somebody else will say, "Yay, let's do that!" And the polls will show us a castle, and then bang, there it goes. So I guess I get inspired by a lot of stuff, but when it comes to people, I get very inspired by people who do LARPs, both kind of like the things I do, but also in a very different way. And there's some weird shit out there.
Can you give us an example?
Yes. This is a LARP from 2004 made by some Finnish friends of mine, and I decided not to participate because it sounded too weird. Basically, they let in the 20 participants into a room filled with 800 kilos of flour. And then they turned on some green lighting, and everybody was in their underwear, playing terminally ill cancer patients, trying to come to terms with their own mortality. And it was explained as part of the game. There was what we call the normality rule, which stated that the whole thing about the underwear and the flour, nobody talks about that. It's like we're having this conversation on a computer. We don't need to talk about it. It's just how it is. That was surreal. So the pictures from it are great, and the stories are great, but it was too weird for me. But stuff like that is out there too.
But that kind of opens another door, which is that live action role play aren't necessarily always going to be entertainments, but they might be venues for kind of working out emotional issues.
Yes, definitely. We did a LARP a couple of years ago for Discovery Channel, one of Charles's LARPs called What Are You Worth?, which is basically about the value of human life, and was a very serious, dark piece on how to judge the value of humanity. Basically, it was based off a film where the Danish government votes through a law that flags everybody who's spending enough government money on hospital bills or on unemployment benefits or rehabilitation programs, that sort of thing. And if there's enough government money spent on them, there's a flag in the system, and they get called in to have a talk with some officials, to some people to review them, psychologists, job agents, etc., etc. And if they're found wanting, they're executed, and if not, then they're returned to society. And we did a LARP on that, where the participants played basically what they didn't want to be in reality. We asked them all, who are the people you hate the most in society? Who are those who you feel are kind of smooching off society? And some said the unemployed, some said rich corporate bosses getting away with it, so on and so on. And then we let them play exactly what they didn't want to be and let them go through these interviews and get set in cages for a few hours.
So one of those aims is empathy.
Training empathy and training looking critically at how society is constructed. We have some people who cost us a very small percentage of people who cost us a rather bigger percentage on the welfare bill. Are we prepared to pay that price? Or would we rather say everybody who's a negative to the state just gets wiped off the face of the earth? The face of the earth.
Can you comment on your philosophy about making stuff? Because it sounds like you're someone who is, I've got this idea, let's make it happen, and I'll figure it out on the way. Can you comment about your approach to creative work?
I think my approach to creative work is a little bit about my approach to life, which is sometimes my wife and I joke that I'm sometimes mistaken, but never in doubt.
Good line.
It's from a 1969 Christopher Stashev sci-fi novel, but when I read it in my youth, I thought, this is me. And it's been me more and more over the years. And sometimes it means making a lot of mistakes, but it also means doing a lot of stuff.
I guess this is a question for Charles, but are you good at learning from your mistakes?
I think Charles will say, no, I'm bad at learning from them, but I'm good at pointing out others. No, of course I learn from my mistakes. Some of them it takes a long time to learn from, but some of them I learn from rather fast. I guess it depends on who points out the mistake and do I agree that it's a mistake or not.
Fair enough. Given your success with your Indiegogo campaign, in the future, would you ever not crowdfund a live-action roleplay concept?
Yes, definitely. Of course, this is a show about crowdfunding, so I should say I'm going to crowdfund everything from now on. But reality is that when we looked at it afterwards, the monetary benefit of crowdfunding for this project was not that big compared to the amount of time we spent on it. There was a huge benefit when it came to press coverage because people understood they're trying to crowdfund a castle. It's an easy story instead of they're doing an event with something and maybe there's a castle involved. So it made for an easy press story, and that was really good, and got our reach a lot more out than we would have elsewise.
Does that mean that if your next thing had less of a hook, that it would be less applicable to the world of crowdfunding?
I think mostly that when we do crowdfunding again, and we will, of course, it should be something where the product is easily bought and relatively cheap. I've just helped a friend crowdfund a children's reading alphabet book based on the Call of Cthulhu mythos by H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes, yeah.
And that was very easy to crowdfund because there's a clear product. You buy the book. That's kind of the support level for buying the book was, I think, $30 or so. Then you get this beautiful hardcover book with illustrations and children's nursery rhymes. Very nice. So the entry barrier was very, very low for getting the actual product. Mm-hmm. While for the LARP, you had to pay $375 to get to the event. And everything else was basically getting something at a price, for example, a wand, or supporting something you were never going to be a part of realistically. So I think crowdfunding a computer game is excellent. Crowdfunding a book is brilliant. Crowdfunding an event, it doesn't really. Crowdfunding is easily globalized, but events aren't. So especially a digital something I would much rather crowdfund something digital than an event in a specific place.
Claus, you ran a very successful campaign. What advice do you have for anyone out there, whether individuals or companies who want to start their own campaign? Can you give us your tips for crowdfunding success?
If I'm going to give 3 pieces of advice on how to have crowdfunding success, they're going to be: 1, make it completely clear what it is you're trying to sell or crowdfund, so that there's no way somebody seeing your video, reading your page, doesn't know what's going on. Are you trying to crowdfund a new car? Are you trying to crowdfund an event? Are you trying to crowdfund a new book or something like that? That's the first thing. You make it very clear what it's about and don't mix up messages like we did. Second thing is that make the entry barrier for getting hold of the actual product low as possible. If you're doing a computer game where the minimum you can pay is like $20, $30, $40, and you actually get the game, that's brilliant. If you're doing an event like we did where the minimum to go to the event is $375, then that's less good. So these are two things. And the third is make it funny and make it interesting. Do not take an iPhone camera and film yourself saying, "Hi, you're now going to see my talking head talk for talk. It is so boring. Show me pictures. Show me video. Even if you're talking, just seeing pictures while you're talking is better than seeing you talking. Unless you're exceptionally hot and good looking on stage, but few of us are."
Good advice. So number one, we've got make it clear. Make it clear what it is that you're trying to crowdfund. Don't mix up your messages. Number two, make the entry barrier as low as possible to get the actual thing that you're crowdfunding.
Yes.
And number three, make it funny. Make it interesting. Don't just point the video and hope for the best. Yeah. Now you say that make the entry barrier as low as possible, but it did work for you. You were selling an expensive thing here.
It did work for us, but we already had quite a bit of network to draw on. We also had massive media coverage, and we had something that was remarkable. I'm not saying you can't sell something that cost $500 or $600. And if I'm going to mention one campaign I really love, they're also in the rather expensive entry level thing, but still worked. But it needs to be. It worked, but it could have worked a lot better if we'd done it differently.
Claus, I wanted to ask you actually about your backers, taking a step back for a second, but just curious about the transparency that you may or may not feel is necessary kind of going forward. Having crowdfunded your campaign, do you feel like the backers are more collaborators now, or is that not the case?
I definitely feel that the backers are collaborators in some sense, but when doing LARPs, the backers are the players, the participants are always collaborators. So for this, it's actually, for us, it's a lower level of collaboration than normal, because there are some people, if you participate in a LARP, then you're co-creating it. It's kind of inherent in the medium that you're co-creating it. While people who've thrown $10 at us in support, we don't expect them to put in more time or effort than that. They're of course welcome to, but we don't expect it. While people who are going to participate, they're more or less forced to put in a shitload of hours to be part of the thing.
But do you feel also more responsible for giving your backers updates and keeping them apprised of the development process?
I wish I could say I felt more responsible for keeping them updated, but sadly we're really bad at that. We do it once in a while, but we're not really good at keeping them updated. We try, but this is an area where we're not good. So if I'm feeling responsible for it, I'm definitely failing.
Right, so before we wrap up, Claus, it's time for guest picks. So this is where our guest, you, tells us about another crowdfunding campaign, past or present, that you think is worth taking a look at. So what have you got for us?
There is one project that is so bloody brilliant that anybody who hasn't seen their video and wants to do anything about crowdfunding should see it. It's about bees. It's about a new way of extracting honey from bees. And I'm just going to see if I can find...
I know exactly the one you're talking about. I think, is it called...
Yes.
Honeyflow.
Honeyflow, yeah.
Yes, and that is, it has everything. It's going to change the world. It's a family story. It has kids. It's easy. It's understandable. Even if you don't want it, then you want to support it because it is so bloody amazing. It's high production value. It's everything that's good in this world.
I couldn't agree more. And didn't they actually become was it the number one Indiegogo campaign ever or something? I mean, they're right up there.
It should be.
They made like $15 million or something close to that.
They wanted like 70 or so. There's nothing in that is not just pure brilliance.
Yeah, I saw it and started thinking that, hey, maybe I could keep bees like for the first time in my life. It looks quite easy now.
It has the human factor. It has smiles. It has the hobby users. It has people where you can just support it. It has Australian accents even. What's not to like?
Well, we're fans. We've actually reached out to them, and they did reply and express interest in being guests on the show. So if we can find a date, hopefully we'll have the Honeyflow guys telling their story.
Yeah,
they are the kings of crowdfunding.
Kings of live action roleplay and
Yes.
Kings of crowdfunding.
Exactly. That's a good,
Big
that's a
double
good hook.
bill. Klaus, so listen, before we go, first of all, thank you for your time. Can you leave us with some words of wisdom? Is there a quote that inspires you? Any words to live by?
I think if I was to pass some words to live by at the end, it's that it's a lot better doing stuff and getting criticism for it and making mistakes than not doing anything. The safest way not to make mistakes is to not do anything. But it's also a really bad way of getting stuff done.
And have you learned that along the way, or is that something you knew from the get-go?
Well, I wish I'd known it from the get-go, but this is something I've learned all along. I've done stuff for many, many years, and some of it has been good, some has been bad, but every time you do stuff, you get better. And this means that my half-assed attempt at something today will actually, at least at some of the things I'm good at, will actually be quite good.
Yeah.
So this perfectionism is the enemy of all productivity.
During that weekend at the College of Wizardry, can you describe your favorite moment, whether it's the beginning where people are kind of amassing, coming together, or whether it's the kind of in the middle of it while everyone's interacting, or something at the end where you're wrapping things up and you're decompressing? What is it? What for you is the zenith of the experience?
For me, one of the favorite things is standing at the bridge to the castle, welcoming the players who've never seen it before, and just see the smiles on their faces when they go, wow, this is real. This is happening. I'm here. I'm part of it. And that is a priceless look. Of course, it's also nice when the whole thing is over and all of us organizers step forward and they clap and they yell and go, woo. But seeing them arrive, just seeing them step into the magic, that is fantastic.
And there must be moments where you're watching people interact, kind of leaping off of your story, but then creating things that are completely unexpected and that are surprised. You, I imagine, are surprised along the way.
Yes, very true. One of the things about doing something as chaotic and unstructured as a LARP is that people make up their own stories and form their own connections and connect the dots in their own way. So at the first event, we had a friend of ours playing a professor who came in and said, please, can we tone down this whole magical doomsday event that's going to happen Friday night? And we said, what doomsday event? And she said, well, I've heard 3 different prophecies from independent sources, and they all sound so smoothly integrated that it has to be something that you've set in motion. And we said, we have no clue as to what you're talking about. Huh. And we called our plot event guy, our event runner guy, and said, Draken, have you made some kind of Friday end the world thing? And he said, no. So out of nowhere, 3 players had decided to come up with weird prophecies about doom, and this 4th player had connected the dots into this whole prophecy thing that we had no idea about.
Fantastic.
That was interesting.
They've created their own fiction or their own, and they
Yes.
made it bigger and better. Wow.
Yes.
So long as no one fills the room full of flour and insists that you all wear your underpants.
Yeah.
Well, now I'd go for it, but 10 years ago, then I wasn't ready for the flower underpants 10 years ago.
Who is, really?
It sounds like a bit of a giggle.
Well, and 10 years from now, Klaus, where do you see this?
10 years from now, there's going to be more of this. There's going to be more variation. There's going to be more LARP in all the world, especially in Europe, but also in the US. It's going to grow. It's going to get more common. It's going to get more prominent. More people are going to do it. More spectacular things are going to happen. Right now, we're seeing the beginning of LARP tourism. College of Wizardry was the first ever kind of real LARP tourism project. And that's just going to grow. And to take an example, you have the $500 skiing vacation, you have the $2,000 skiing vacation, and you have the $20,000 skiing vacation. We're only getting to the $500 LARP, and we're not even there yet. So in the future, we're going to see even more crazy, outrageous, creative, impressive stuff.
I love it. Klaus, you've been a fantastic guest on the show. You've been generous with your insights. We've been fortunate to have you. Thank you for all your time.
Thank you for having me.
And where can people go online, Klaus, to find out more about the College of Wizardry and any other LARPs that you're organizing?
Well, if you want to find out more about the College of Wizardry, go to cowlarp.com, like a cow, the one that says moo. And if you want to hear about Fairweather Manor, the 1914 Downton Abbey-inspired one, it's at fmlarp.com. And our Robin Hood LARP is at rhlarp.com. And there'll probably be more stuff to come on other larp.coms in the future.
We'll edit something in later. Thanks. And thanks for your advice too. We wish you the best of success with the College of Wizardry and all the other events that you're creating.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your time.
So you've been listening to Crowd Scene, the show about successful crowdfunding campaigns and the people who make them happen. Our big thanks to our guest Claus Raasted for his time and his insights in this episode.
To find out more about the College of Wizardry, visit cowlarp.com. That's COWLARP.com.
And to hear about upcoming guests on this show, please sign up to our newsletter at crowdsceneshow.com. If you like the podcast, writing a good review on iTunes helps us reach more listeners. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Crowd Scene on iTunes or any other podcast app to download upcoming episodes automatically. Pete and I want to say thank you as always to singer-songwriter Kim Bookbinder for the theme music for Crowd Scene. To find out more about Kim, please check out kimbookbinder.com. Special thanks to our friend Jim Fowler and his expert ears. For more on Jim, visit jimfowlermusic.com.
Crowd scene, gonna kick it with Pete and Mike. Crowd scene, interviews behind the hype. Crowd scene, crowd scene. What do you do? What do you say to make crowdfunding go your way? Crowd scene. Crowd scene. Crowd scene. Crowd scene. Crowd scene. Your shake brings all the backers to the yard.
Now that's what I call epic.